As we read every poem in this class, we're always going to be looking at these 5 elements of poetry. I think that these 5 elements will help you understand the poems a little bit better and be able to analyze them. So when we look at the names of these elements, they're pretty self-explanatory. Form of a poem, sound in a poem, imagery that you see in a poem, figurative language that you can find in the poem, and the speaker of the poem. So we're going to go through each of these separately, and we're going to start with form. Form, just like its name, is the way a poem looks on the page, the way that it is formed. We can classify it into 2 different ways. The first one is free verse. And free verse, just like it sounds, is free. There really isn't a pattern. There's no structure to it. You might see 3 words in a line, and then 5 words in a line, and then 7 words in a line, then 1 word in a line. There's no rhythm, there's no rhyme. I often think free verse poems are a little bit harder to read at first because you can't find the natural rhythm that goes along with it, and I find myself reading them over a couple of times to help me build a little bit more meaning with them. And I'll show you a couple examples here in a second. The other way that we would categorize it then is structured, which would be the opposite of that. We would see a pattern that was intentionally put there by the author. It's not an accident. We might see a pattern in how the lines are written. Maybe it looks like a shoe or a basketball or a cloud. It actually creates an image the way the lines are written. There might also be a pattern of rhythm or rhyme. If you can find that pattern, it's not an accident. The author intended for it to be there. Another example of structure might be how the lines are grouped, and we call those stanzas. If you have groups of 2 lines together and then a space, we would call those couplets. 3 lines together we would call triplets, and 4 lines together we would call quatrains. And we could go on in this way, but if there is a pattern where you see couplets throughout the entire poem, or triplets or quatrains throughout the entire poem, it's there for a reason, and the author intended it, so we would call it structured. So let's look at a couple examples. The first poem we have here is about a flower, and if you read the words that go around the outside, they all are types of flowers or descriptions of flowers, and if you sit back and look at the poem itself, it makes the shape of a flower. That was definitely intended to be there by the author, and so we see a definite form or structure to the poem. Another example is this poem, Tree House, by Shel Silverstein. A tree house, a free house, a secret you and me house, a high up in the leafy branches, cozy as can be house, a street house, a neat house, be sure and wipe your feet house, is not my kind of house at all. Let's go live in a tree house. When we look at this poem, or actually even just listening to the poem, you see some rhythm. You can almost tap your foot as you're reading it. We hear some repetition of sound, repetition of words that make that rhythm. House, house, and house. 3 of the words in one stanza rhyme at the ends of the lines. And we can also see that those stanzas are broken up in a consistent pattern. We see 4 lines and then a break, and then another 4 lines and a break. So those are different quatrains. It's not an accident. The author intended for it to be written that way. An example of a free verse poem is Reminder. I was not happy with the rain until my eye caught 5 wet leaves, a mysterious autumn watercolor gift here on this broken road. When you look at this poem, you can see that there's no break in the stanzas. It's all just one big stanza. There isn't a pattern in how many numbers of words are in each line. You don't hear a rhythm. You don't hear a rhyme. And it's almost hard to read because you want to make a break at the end of that line, but the break doesn't come until a little bit further down. So we would call that poem free verse. There's no consistent pattern that the author intended. I think of free verse a lot of times they're just an author's expression of what they're feeling or what they're thinking or seeing, and they create a poem in an artistic way.